X-Men Days of Future Past erases every mistake previous X-Men movies have made, so hopefully we never have to see shit like this again.
Don't you know who I am? I'm the Juggernaut, bitch!
Hey there guys, how are you? Welcome to the Flick Pick movie review of X-Men Days of Future Past, and with all that said, let me take a drink of my Mountain Dew. And now I'm ready to do a fucking berserker attack. I don't even have claws. Okay, let's talk about this movie. This is directed by Bryan Singer, who directed X-Men 1 and X-Men 2. Now going into this movie, I didn't know what to expect from director Bryan Singer, because let's face it, the last time he directed a big comic book adaptation that hit the big screen, it was this movie right here. I was a little bit depressed after the movie, that's all I'm saying. But with all that said, I have to say, Bryan Singer, you redeemed yourself, sir. So what is the plot of this movie? What is it all about? In the future, Sentinel mutant killing machines take over. They almost destroy humanity by wiping it out. They're out of control, and the only man who can go back in time and save the day is Wolverine. Now, if you've seen X-Men 1 through 3, which by the way, we're gonna pretend like 3 doesn't exist because this movie doesn't either. But I will say, those movies felt like Wolverine and the gang. And that was my biggest fear going into this movie, because I knew Hugh Jackman, Wolverine, was gonna be the centric character, pretty much carrying this movie. And I have to say, they did a good job at blending all the characters together. It felt like an ensemble cast, rather than just a Wolverine movie. The majority of characters in this movie all got enough screen time. You know, they got to shine, they had their moment. You know, you had Magneto, you had James McAvoy, who plays young Professor Xavier, which by the way, he's probably one of my favorite characters of the movie because he was very humanized, very down to earth. You know, he was addicted to painkillers. He pretty much reminded me of how my uncle would have been in 1973. You got to see Michael Fassbender being a young Magneto once again, which by the way, perfect casting, just a badass. And let's talk about Jennifer Lawrence painted in blue playing Mystique. Yeah, that's fun to look at. And then once again, you get to see Patrick Stewart and Ian McKellen playing older versions of Magneto and Xavier. You guys want to see my Ian McKellen Magneto impression? Here it goes.
I have the power to move metal!
And the biggest praise I can give to this movie is throughout the movie, you're introduced to a ton of characters, but never once do you feel like they're just being shoehorned in there for the fact of saying, oh, he was in the movie and he was too. They all matter. They all have a reason for being there. Unlike other comic book movies where like, yeah, we have 5 minutes, throw them in the fucking movie, go! And speaking of characters in X-Men Days of Future Past, there's one character that got a lot of hate on the internet before this movie came out, and that was Quicksilver. A lot of people said he looked awful, and I gotta admit, you know, wearing a silver leather jacket does look a little bit tacky. The character Quicksilver in this movie was well done, had some of the best scenes throughout the movie. There's one scene that includes Quicksilver. It's a big action sequence, and I was like, I was just blown away by it. I was watching it. It was funny. It was well done, well filmed. And you're like, yeah, that is Quicksilver. That is the character brought to the big screen. Now, this movie is a time travel movie, and in time travel movies, things can get very convoluted very quickly. But this movie does a good job at balancing everything, making things make sense. Now, another thing that this movie does very well is it balances those dramatic scenes with the comedic ones. There's a lot of funny things that happen in this movie. A lot of comic book references that comic book fanboys will pick up on. Now, the majority of this movie does take place in 1973 in the past, where Wolverine is sent back to basically correct things that are going to happen in the future. And I gotta say, I like movies that take place in the past. There's just something about them, that nostalgia feel you get, even though I wasn't alive in the 1970s, but I like the music, the vibe, the clothes, the bell bottoms, all that. I don't know why, I just got some weird fascination with all of it. I gotta think about why that is. Now, one of the more interesting things that this movie does, and other X-Men movies have done as well, is they utilize real-life past events and they put them into their stories. You know, for instance, like the Holocaust in the first X-Men movie, or like the JFK assassination that plays a part in this movie. I like things like that. So X-Men Days of Future Past, surprisingly better than I expected it to be, and I had high expectations for this movie. It wasn't your standard typical Hollywood bloated hogwash pile of shit where they just throw random explosions in there for the fact that they have a $300 million budget, and they're like, yeah, we can blow that up, put more CGI over there, and I don't care what you do over there, just do it. This movie doesn't feel like that. It feels like every scene in this movie has a purpose. Every scene sets up the next scene. Everything that they do in the movie, they're doing for a reason, because they're enhancing the story and carrying the plot along. They're not just throwing random bullshit in there for the fact of putting it in there. And that's not to say that this movie doesn't feature big action-packed, grandiose scenes, but they balance it so well. What they do is they give you characters and emotions and a story that's actually interesting and intriguing along the way. So when you see those big action scenes unfold, when people die and get hurt, you actually care what's happening because you're invested in the characters. So X-Men Days of Future Past, in my personal opinion, I think this is the truest, best representation of any X-Men movie we've ever gotten to see so far. And with all that said, I'm gonna give X-Men Days of Future Past a solid A. That was my uppercut. I was gonna do a berserker attack, but I don't have the claw. So X-Men Days of Future Past. I really enjoyed the movie. Probably my favorite movie of the summer so far. Now here's my question to you guys, and let me know down below. What is your favorite X-Men movie, or what did you think about X-Men Days of Future Past? So anyway guys, thanks for watching. Make sure you subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you next time.